As I teased just a moment ago, our next guest, Alex Newman, warns that George Soros-backed globalists are on the march everywhere, from the Los Angeles riots to Romania. So do the enemies of President Trump, the globalists, smell blood in the water, or is this all just a series of coincidences? Newman joins us now. He's the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media, and I would say an expert on the globalists. When we talk, my team and I were talking about wanting to talk about some of the globalist agenda and where it currently stands. We never even got to talk about the Bilderberg meeting that just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago, or what our overlords there might have planned for us, because we've been so focused on the Middle East. When I mentioned that we need to talk about this, everyone said, Alex Newman. So welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me, Emerald.
So what have we been missing while we were looking at the squirrel, Alex?
Well, a lot of very, very critical developments. But I'll start by saying what's going on in the Middle East and also with Russia and Ukraine is actually a critical component of the broader globalist strategy. They have understood for generations that war is actually the fastest catalyst for advancing the cause of globalism. And they have said so publicly in their own reports. Back in 1962, the U.S. State Department commissioned a report from the Institute for Defense Analyses that was put together by a guy called Lincoln Bloomfield. He was an intelligence operative. He came out of the Council on Foreign Relations, which I call kind of deep state globalist headquarters in the United States, literally formed to suck the United States into the globalist system. He argued in this report, I mean, the title of the report kind of gives the game away, a world effectively controlled by the United Nations. And that was the objective of the report. How do we get from where we were back then in 1962, a world of essentially sovereign nation states, to a world effectively controlled by the UN? And what he said was actually very simple. If we go using organic processes, it's going to take over 200 years to get to a one world system controlled by the UN. But if we use war, crises, and the threat of war, we can get there much faster. And all they had to do was look at history. World War I gave birth to the League of Nations, to numerous institutions like the Bank for International Settlements and Interpol that later emerged. World War II gave birth to the UN, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the European Coal and Steel Community, which eventually morphed into the EU, which is the globalist model for regional government right now. So what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on in Europe, and of course what's going on with communist China, are critical components of this. But you're absolutely right. Donald Trump ran as the peace president, and he's been saying all along, we're done with the wars, we're done with the regime change, we need to focus on our own country now. And so these international quagmires that the globalists are stirring up all over the place are an effort, first of all, to get Donald Trump to go back on his promises. Second of all, to finish off destroying the United States. And third of all, to distract from the very real crises here at home, like the millions of illegals that are running around, like the need for passing some of these policies in the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's a catastrophe on all fronts, and I hope that the American people start to see through it.
Is he falling for it, Alex? We hate to ask that question, but I ask because President Trump has hinted in the last 24 hours that he might send Patriot missiles to Ukraine. Let's take a listen to that soundbite.
So let me just tell you, they do want to have the anti-missile missiles, okay, as they call them, the Patriots. And we're going to see if we can make some available. You know, they're very hard to get. We need them too. We were supplying them to Israel. And they're very effective, 100% effective. Hard to believe how effective. And they do want that more than any other thing, as you probably know. That's a very good question.
Yeah, very troubling.
Should he do so?
He absolutely should not, right? The founding fathers of this country had a very wise view, almost unanimously, on this issue. America does not go abroad seeking monsters to destroy. We want to be friends with all nations, but we don't want to be involved in the entangling alliances. And I understand that Putin is not a nice guy. I understand that the regime in Iran is nasty. I understand that the regime in communist China is an existential threat to our national security. What do they all three have in common, right? They were all put in place and built up by the very same globalists who are now telling us we need to lose hundreds of thousands of men and trillions of dollars fighting them. The crazies in Iran were literally brought to power when the CIA overthrew the pro-America Shah of Iran. The Chinese communists were literally brought to power when the U.S. State Department, people like George Marshall, the globalists, put an arms embargo on our ally, Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the Free Chinese. Even the Soviet Union was born in the aftermath of the Bolshevik Revolution, financed by Wall Street, as documented by the great Stanford historian Anthony Sutton. Putin, of course, was a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. He was like two peas in a pod with his buddy Henry Kissinger. This is being orchestrated behind the scenes in a way that Americans don't understand. And we saw during the first term of Donald Trump that he is susceptible to being manipulated by these kinds of operations. COVID was a perfect example. His initial instincts were absolutely correct. This is crazy. We're not going to participate. You guys are deceiving us. But he ended up going along. Same thing here. His initial instincts were correct. We got to stay out of this, but here he is getting sucked in by a number of neocon globalist advisors around him. So I'm hoping he will have learned from the first term, but I think it would help a lot if his strongest supporters would speak out loudly and clearly on these things.
It would. And here's my concern as well, Alex, is that when we're talking about his domestic agenda, he obviously has very little support in the Congress. I mean, just look at Leader Thune. He's actively working to subvert the Trump agenda, making sure that partisan Senate parliamentarian stays in place. And there are many members of Congress who have voiced concerns about that. To me, they say that's a huge issue, that it effectively renders null and void in the Senate anything that's really America first that President Trump wants to do. I think there's a failure a little bit, and I don't know if this is Trump's not delegating it enough, but there's not really, from what I hear, because I've been asking a lot of people at the White House, a strong legislative affairs team, it seems. I don't know who's running point. I know for the big, beautiful bill, it was Stephen Miller, who's very good at that, but there needs to be more, right? And that's not really what his job really is. Does Trump need to get a true team, a strong team in place at the White House to push this domestic policy in the Congress?
He absolutely does, Emerald. I've been hearing the same thing from folks on the Hill. Unfortunately, what's happening here with this one big, beautiful bill is all the Rhino, and we have a Rhino majority. Let's be clear. We don't have a Republican majority. We have a Rhino majority. And Speaker Johnson and Leader Thune are leaders of the Rhino Party. And what they're doing here is they know Trump has these really significant priorities. And so they're loading up this bill with every ridiculous idea you can think of. No regulation of AI for the next decade. We're going to nationalize the private schools by forcing them to obey the Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act. We're going to stop states from being able to stop these crazy carbon capture things. We're not going to enshrine any of Donald Trump's domestic agenda on climate change or the border, any of these things into law. We have a serious problem with Congress. And if Trump doesn't get serious about exposing, frankly, I think he's going after the wrong guys. Thomas Massie, I don't think, is his enemy. There are rhinos in the Rhino Caucus who are the real saboteurs here, who need to be targeted by Donald Trump. So I really think he needs to delegate some of this responsibility to people who know how Congress works, who know who the rhinos are, and who know what needs to be done to get Congress to be serious about it. We may, after the midterms, have the Republicans losing power. This may be the last chance to enshrine some of these critical policies into federal law. It would be an incredible shame if it was lost, because that will set the tone for the rest of his presidency.
Yeah, he actually needs the argument I've made is that, and this could probably be wrapped into one, is he needs a real political warfare team. Because right. In some ways he's playing political warfare with the rhinos in Congress. I do want to talk about the global implications of what we're seeing as distractions at home. And I said it in the open, from LA to Romania. We talked to a lot of people in Romania, and they complained about the same globalist influences that we do here in the United States. And you wrote an excellent piece recently about Albania and how that, and it seems like that could relate to what we saw at the chaos in Los Angeles as well. Alex.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. I just spoke a couple of days ago with the former president of Albania, actually the first democratically elected president after communism. And he said, thanks to George Soros and the Joe Biden State Department, that nation is being dragged back into the communist slavery and the tyranny that they fought so hard to escape from. I was actually in Albania a few years ago, and this was already starting to become very, very obvious. We're seeing the same thing in Romania. I've spoken several times with the man who was supposed to win the presidential election. I don't believe for a moment that this was an honest election. I believe they cheated to keep their minions in power, because they know if a single country in the European Union falls into the hands of genuine patriots who are opposed to the globalist agenda, they're going to be in big trouble. We're seeing the same thing in the nation of Georgia. This is happening around the world. And you're right, the domestic front is another major front in this war. As the director of policy and planning at the National Security Council during the first Trump administration put it, Rich Higgins, there's an international coalition of globalists, communists, socialists, and Islamists who are working to destroy the United States of America as a nation and as an ideal. And what we're seeing is manifestations of this all around the world and, of course, right here at home.
The great Rich Higgins. There's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't wish he was still here with us and in the fight. We lost Rich Higgins a few years ago. He was a great American. I'm glad to hear you quote him. It's good to see you, Alex Newman. Thank you so much for putting this all in context for us, because sometimes we can get so mired down in what they're putting in front of us, but we have to look at the larger picture to combat it. So thank you so much. You can catch Alex with his Liberty Sentinel Media, and he's also right here. He's in the Lindell TV family. And we appreciate you, Alex. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Emerald.